What's up, everybody? It's Dakota, and today I'm going to be going over a new-ish modern deck. Obviously, it's been around really since Modern Horizons 2 kicked off and created all these new archetypes and stuff that have kind of dominated the modern format. And this is one that is abusing a rather old mechanic to essentially cheat out like a new suspend spell. And that's the Crashing Footfalls deck, aka Rhinos, Team of Rhinos, four color Rhinos, whatever. We're going to be looking at the three color version, which is the teamer version, just because it's kind of, I would say, probably the more consistent, more straightforward builds. There are some other builds that play white for like Prismatic Ending, like Teferi, have a little bit more interaction against things like Ragavan and some of the other like annoying permanents that you have to deal with. But to me personally, the teamer version just seems like a very straightforward, probably more consistent build of the deck. So before I get into that though, I would appreciate it if you guys subscribe to the channel and liked all these videos. Just trying to get back out there and make more content. Going to be trying to do 2 to 3 videos a week just on different modern decks and just my general thoughts on like the modern metagame and how things are shaping up, and maybe even some like personal tournament experience as well. But anyway, with that out of the way, like let's get right into it. So why did they call it Rhinos? Well, because of the card Crashing Footfalls. Crashing Footfalls suspends for a single green, and you have to wait 4 turns. Or if you cascade into it with the new Modern Horizons 2 card, Old the Magic in general, Shardless Agent, which is a 3 mana 2/2 with Cascade. Obviously, you have like your OG way of cascading into broken suspend cards in Violent Outburst, which you can be done at instant speed, and notable that Cascade does not care if the card itself is like in Crashing Football's case, that's a sorcery. If you uh, Cascade into Crashing Footfalls with a Violent Outburst, you can cast a spell on your opponent's end step, as an example, unless there's something else that is like throwing off timing of like certain cards. So that's essentially the game plan that this deck is trying to enact. Get to 3 mana, have a Cascader in your hand, like a Chargeless Agent or a Violent Outburst, and then just cascade into a Crashing Footfalls and hopefully kind of win the game from there after making 2 Rhinos. Sometimes you need to do it like 2 or 3 times cascading into it, but most of the time two can get the job done if your opponent stumbles at all. And that's kind of what this deck is pretty good at doing, is punishing like slower decks, because obviously 2/4/4s with trample is really hard to beat when your opponent's like stuck on one land and playing like Ragavan's DRCs, or maybe if they're like a burn deck playing like Goblin Guide, maybe they get to 2 mana and they get to play Eidolon of the Revel, things like that. Just very hard to beat these Rhinos in combat. You have cards like Bone Crusher Giant and Brazen Borrower are cards that like kind of get to do like semi-powerful things. Like Bone Crusher is basically a shock that makes damage not being able to be prevented this turn, and Brazen Borrower being able to bounce a non-land permanent, notably to an opponent's hand, can be very good in spots for sure. Like definitely Brazen Borrower more like the mirrors, where you can just bounce their Rhino token and you're able to kind of beat in and force trades. And also with the fact that the Rhinos have trample, like if you attack with 2 Rhinos and they block with 2 Rhinos, you can bounce a Rhino, trample over for 4, and obviously kill their other Rhino, or trade really with yours. Bone Crusher definitely gives you some interaction against like the more low to the ground decks, as you'll see with cards like Dead Gone and Fire and Ice. That's kind of like the package that gets to allow you to essentially like play interactive spells with a low cost on like turn 1 and turn 2, while also not being able to cascade into them, because Cascade cares about the converted mana cost of the card total. So when you're playing with cards like Dead Gone and Fire and Ice, like even though Fire has a 2 converted mana cost and Ice has a 2 converted mana cost, and we get countered by say a Spell Snare when you cast them, technically when you're cascading, this converted mana cost is 4, just like Dead Gone. Bone Crusher Giant's technically 5, even though again like the cost in like the top right hand corner is 3. You won't cascade into these, and you won't cascade into Dead Gone or Fire and Ice either. So that's kind of like the interaction that the deck kind of has. Also note it plays 4 Fury, which obviously can just be like removal on its own, where you could like fetch up a Katara, Ketria Triome to get all 3 colors of mana and still be able to Fury to kill your opponent's like turn one play. You know, if you need to. Something like a Ragavan is something that you normally like end up killing on site. Dragon Rage Channeler too can be one of those cards that you just kind of get rid of it once you see it, and just because it can gain your opponent a ton of advantage and selection, you know, as the game goes along, and puts a very quick clock on you. And obviously, Rhinos can't really block a Delirious Channeler. So really for the rest of the deck, I mean, you would play for Force of Negation. It's a way that you can kind of like beat Thoughtseize on turn zero. Now your opponent goes turn one Thoughtseize, you can Force of Negation, pitch like any one of your like blue spells like Fire and Ice, Prismari Command, Brazen Borrower, even like a redundant Shardless Agent. Normally you'd be doing that to kind of protect like your Cascader. Obviously, it's bad if your opponent just has like another discard spell, but you know if that's kind of what they were leading on was like turn one discard, you do have some play against it, and you're able to protect your combo. Prismari Command is kind of like an all-in-one. You know, choose two modes for 3 mana, pretty good. You don't cascade into it, and it's a Shatter. It's an Is It Charm, the draw two, discard two mode. Create a treasure token and deal 2 damage to any target. I believe those two modes are probably like the least used, but there could be a world where you create like a treasure token off of like Prismari Command, so you could possibly set up cascading and then be able to leave up like 1 or 2 mana interaction as well. You know, hitting another land drop, you have 4 lands plus the treasure token from Prismari Command. Definitely gonna can definitely give you some options going forward. The mana base, the most exciting part. Beseiju, new from Neon, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Uh, Taps for a green mana, but you can also pay 1 and a green and discard it to destroy an artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. They get to search for a land with a basic land type, and they put it onto the battlefield. And this effect costs 1 less if you control a legendary creature. Obviously, there is no legendary creatures in this deck, so it's always going to cost 2. But the upside being that this is essentially main deck removal for like lands, like if you're playing against Tron, which can, in theory, go bigger than what you can. You can just blow up one of their lands, take them off Tron, and they're still trying to kind of rebuild from there. Titan, you can tag like one of their bounce lands with the trigger on the stack. Uh, you can kind of blow them out that way. Um, just little tricks and stuff like that for like main deck use. It's really kind of like no cost to you at all to play it. Obviously, it doesn't really fix your mana all that well, but the fact that like it taps for green, your two most important spells in the deck require green mana, and you're only playing one of these. And the upside of being able to destroy a problematic land, or maybe a main deck like artifact or enchantment hate that stops you from being able to cast like your footfalls, is pretty good, and just like an extra layer of protection that the deck can offer you. Gemstone Cavern is another land that I'll point out. Obviously, like Breeding Pool and like the fetch lands just give you like the color mana you need. But Gemstone Caverns is interesting because if it's in your opening hand and you're not going first, you can put it into play with a counter on with a luck counter on it. And if you do, you remove a card from your hand from the game, and it'll tap for 1 mana of any color. So this can fix your mana and kind of like keep you at parity. So you can put Gemstone Caverns into play, your opponent plays land, go, you know, you're playing your second land on your technical first turn, you know, even though you 2 for 1 yourself to kind of do it, it does kind of get you ahead of your opponent. And just even though they're on the play and they don't get to draw a card, you essentially get to play a land like you're on the play, and then you know draw a card for your technical like first turn that you're taking. So really sweet. If you somehow end up with both in your hand, please don't play it because it is a legendary land. And no matter how many times I've seen this card and read it, I've seen people like do it. And even though I know this, I always wonder why the heck aren't you slamming 2 of these into play when you could just play your 3 mana spell on turn one, and then remember that it is legendary, and then you watch other people do it, and it's hilarious as hell. Some other lands. I believe the only other utility land is the other uh, special land from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Otawara Soaring City. For 4 mana, you can discard it and return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. This is really good because Teferi Time Raveler kind of just nerfs the deck. If you try to Violent Outburst or Shardless Agent into a obviously into a Crashing Footfalls, you're going to be very sad to find out that like Teferi obviously just kind of stops the whole thing. Just really is not our jam. So this gives us a little bit of play. Brazen Borrower can kind of does do the same thing, and returning like a creature or a Teferi Planeswalker to our opponent's hand. Uh, this also having some like niche uses with like Bone Crusher Giant, like Fury, Shardless Agent. Your opponent goes to wrath the board, you pick up your own Shardless Agent, cast your own Shardless Agent, make more Rhinos, and force your opponent to have answers for essentially a board that they wrath the turn before, but are now staring down again on like their next turn. So pretty good. The sideboard pretty straightforward. Force of Vigor, Hammer decks are still really popular. The Urza Saga decks are really powerful. So if this can blow up a Construct and an Urza Saga before they get to go search for their uh, permanent off of the third chapter, that's pretty good. Also, the fact that you have to respect cards like not Torpor Orb, that's me. You have to respect cards like Void Mirror. You have to respect cards like Chalice of the Void and Engineered Explosives, and this can kind of like force their hand, where they're obviously forced to play those cards out on 0 if they got them, and then it just leaves them vulnerable to removal like Force of Vigor and things like that. Sometimes your opponent can sort of kind of play around it by like playing it for 0 and then immediately popping it when you've already made Rhinos, but you're essentially forcing them to spend that mana like on their own turn per se, more so than you know a lot of the time you're gonna have people that just kind of like it's turn one, like I'm gonna run it out because I'm just never gonna pay mana for this anyway, whatever, and you can kind of get them there. But Force of Vigor is just very powerful, probably the best enchantment and artifact destruction in the format, and definitely by far the most efficient, being able to cost you 2 cards to blow up 2 things, essentially being a 2 for 2. Mystical Dispute is a counter spell, for a blue counter that costs 1 mana if it's countering a blue spell, but 3 mana essentially for a mana leak that doesn't get cascaded into. Very good, lets you get some interaction against like the control decks, uh, and just have some counterplay for trying to resolve your Rhinos. Pretty good. Endurance, probably the premier graveyard hate, and it's basically the same thing as like Force of Vigor, where it's a card that um, you can pitch a card to it, and more so like more often like a 2 for 2 with like Force of Vigor is usually like more so in your favor, and definitely with like Endurance you can make it so it's just a complete blowout for like your opponent. And obviously casting this thing is definitely not like super crazy, and just having like a 3/4 is also just like very very powerful. Just a very good card, and probably just another like probably number 1 or number 2 in like green sideboard staples for the format for sure. And of course, like Blood Moon. Believe it or not, in 2022, Blood Moon can still just win you games on its own. Obviously, the simple line of text, non-basic lands are mountains. A lot of the time, if your opponent just doesn't play around this, or they just don't think about Blood Moon and you Blood Moon them, they're gonna have a bad time. And definitely when you're able to put 8 to 10 power into play from seemingly out of nowhere, uh, giving them only like 2 turns to be able to try to interact with Blood Moon and then interact with the board is basically like impossible for a lot of decks. So Blood Moon definitely in a lot of matchups can just get you free wins, which is pretty good. And that's the deck, Crashing Footfalls, aka Big Dumb Rhinos. Uh, my overall take on it is it's probably still a pretty good deck. It definitely hits a lot of the notes that I like to see like in a modern deck. It can interact through via Force Negation. It can interact with the board like Brazen Borrower, Fire Ice, Dead Gone, and Bone Crusher Giant. Puts a speedy clock into play by being able to play like if you do have a Shardless Agent, you're putting 10 power into play on like turn 3. Sometimes turn 2 if you're have the Gemstone Cavern draw and you're on the draw. And just overall interacts well with the format where people are just kind of like playing Ragavans and also trying to do like scary things. This kind of goes in the middle road where it doesn't do the scariest thing, but it's definitely one of the most threatening things you could be doing in the format right now. And on top of it, you get to interact with the decks that try to go underneath and kind of race those decks that are trying to go over the top and do the big flashy things. So definitely a deck that's worth picking up and learning the ins and outs of. There's some really neat tricks that you could do with this deck. So if anybody watching, if it gets like enough likes, or I get enough suggestions for, I can definitely do an in-depth dive on Temur Rhinos or some version of Rhinos. Um, Feel free to leave that comment. And if there's any other deck that you want to see me kind of like go over, break down, whatever, sure to leave it in the comments, and also leave a like on the video too, if you guys like enjoy this kind of stuff. I know I definitely kind of get long-winded for like a deck tech, because normally the deck tech turns into the reasons why like cards are being played in a deck, and I honestly think that's more important than just being like, hey, this deck plays this card for reasons and stuff and things, whatever. But that's gonna do it for me in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, please leave a like. Consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see like more deck techs, more thoughts and opinions like on the modern format and just Magic in general. I'd appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.